When I stepped into my late grandfather's library that morning, the first thing I noticed wasn't the relatives gathered inside or the silence hanging over the room. It was the old metal case sitting open on his desk. I had locked it myself the last time I visited. Someone had opened it before I arrived. Standing beside the desk was my younger brother, wearing a satisfied smile that felt completely out of place on the day of our grandfather's will reading. His fiancée, still dressed in her police uniform after finishing an early shift, stood quietly near the doorway with her arms folded, watching everything unfold. Without saying a word, my brother reached into the case, lifted one of my military medals between two fingers, and looked around the room. "These," he said with a smirk, "every single one of them is fake. Some lies aren't told because people expect others to believe them. They're told because they hope the truth disappears forever." The executor hadn't even begun reading the will. Family members filled every chair in the library. Fresh coffee sat untouched on a side table, while quiet whispers drifted from one corner of the room to another. My aunt refused to meet my eyes. My cousin kept staring at his phone, as if he wanted to be anywhere else. The atmosphere made one thing painfully clear. Most of them had already decided who they believed before anyone had presented a single fact. My grandfather had left very specific instructions. No inheritance would be distributed until every disagreement within the family had been settled. My brother knew that, which was exactly why he chose this moment. My name is Ethan Walker. I spent 23 years serving my country, and during most of that time, even my own family never truly knew what my work involved. That wasn't an accident. I had always preferred to keep my service private. My brother knew that better than anyone. He raised the metal case higher for everyone to see. "I don't think he should receive a single dollar," he announced. "Not until he proves these medals actually belong to him." His fiancée slowly rested one hand near the handcuffs attached to her duty belt. She wasn't joking. The room stayed silent long enough for my grandfather's antique clock to fill every second with its steady ticking. No one laughed. No one objected. No one defended me. That silence hurt more than the accusation itself. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, but none of them stepped forward. They simply watched, waiting to see which version of me would survive the morning. Finally, my brother's fiancée broke the silence. "If those medals aren't legally yours," she said calmly, "wearing them could be considered stolen valor. That's not something law enforcement ignores." Her voice carried complete confidence, the confidence of someone who believed she already knew the truth. I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly placed my truck keys on the table beside my grandfather's favorite coffee mug. A faint coffee stain still circled the bottom of the cup from the last morning we'd shared together. For a brief moment, I focused on that mug instead of the people surrounding me. Sometimes, ordinary memories make the strongest anchor when everything else begins falling apart. My brother mistook my silence for defeat. "Look at him," he said proudly. "He can't even explain where he got them." The executor cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker," he asked respectfully, "before we continue, would you like to respond?" I looked at the medals. Then I looked back at him. They're exactly where they belong. That simple answer frustrated my brother far more than any denial ever could. He immediately reached into his backpack and placed a thick folder onto the table. I came prepared. It wasn't a large file, but it was obvious someone had spent weeks putting it together. That alone felt disturbing. He opened it slowly, almost enjoying every second of the performance. Inside were printed articles about military decorations, copies of public records, photographs, highlighted documents, and pages covered with handwritten notes. One by one, he slid them across the table toward the executor without once looking in my direction. "I searched every database I could find," he announced. "His name isn't connected to a single one of these medals." Several relatives leaned forward. That was all it took. These days, most people assume that if something doesn't appear online, then it simply never existed. I stayed exactly where I was. His fiancée picked up another medal, carefully turning it over in her hand. "These aren't souvenirs someone buys at a military supply store," she said. "If he's lying about this, it's a very serious offense." One thing immediately stood out to me. She never asked me a single question. She had already written the story in her mind. The executor adjusted his glasses and quietly examined every page while my brother eagerly pointed toward highlighted sections, explaining each document as though he were presenting evidence before a judge. Then he delivered the sentence he'd clearly rehearsed. "Our grandfather spent his entire life building this family's legacy," he said. "He wouldn't want his estate passed down to someone pretending to be a war hero." Those words shifted the mood of the entire room. Not because everyone suddenly believed my brother, but because accusations are often easier to accept than uncomfortable truths. The executor slowly lifted his eyes from the documents and looked directly at me. "Mr. Walker," he said carefully, "these papers certainly raise some serious concerns." Before I had the chance to answer, the radio clipped to my brother's fiancée's shoulder crackled to life. She pressed the button, listened for a second, then stepped toward me. Her posture became noticeably firmer. "I'm going to need you to come with me," she said. Nobody moved. She closed the distance between us and rested her hand near her handcuffs. "I'm opening an investigation into possible stolen valor. Until this is resolved, you'll need to accompany me." I calmly looked at her badge before shifting my attention to the stack of papers spread across the table. "You built this entire accusation using public records?" "Yes," she replied confidently. "And it never crossed your mind that not every military record is available to the public?" For the first time that morning, she hesitated. Only for a second. My brother let out a sarcastic laugh. "Nice excuse, Ethan," he said. "If those medals are really yours, then prove it." "I can." The room fell silent again. Slowly, I reached inside my jacket. Several people instinctively stiffened, unsure of what I was about to pull out. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a file. It was a small black leather identification holder that had stayed in my possession for years, but had almost never been shown to another person. I placed it gently on the table. The executor picked it up first. He read the opening line once, then immediately read it again. The color in his face subtly changed. My brother's fiancée stepped forward and took the card from him. She studied it for several seconds. "I've never seen identification like this before." "You weren't meant to," I answered quietly. For more than 2 decades, I had avoided conversations like this. Now I finally had no choice. Some of the units I served with operated under restrictions that remained classified long after the missions were completed. Large portions of my service history had intentionally been removed from public databases. Even the awards I'd receive could only be verified through secure military channels that ordinary background searches could never access. My brother folded his arms. How convenient. I ignored him. Instead, I looked toward the security guard standing outside the library entrance. "I need you to make one phone call." The guard frowned. "To who?" "The Pentagon." This time, my brother didn't laugh immediately. For the first time that entire morning, his smile disappeared. The security guard looked uncertain before turning toward the executor. The executor gave a slow nod. "Make the call." My brother forced another laugh, but this one lacked the confidence of the earlier ones. "You're actually going along with this?" Without answering, the guard stepped into the hallway. I quietly recited a phone number from memory. It wasn't a number most people would recognize. In fact, I hadn't dialed it myself in years. My brother's fiancée crossed her arms once more. "If this is some kind of performance," she warned, "you're only making things worse." "I know." My answer caught her completely off guard. No one spoke after that. The silence returned. The old grandfather clock echoed through the library, one steady tick at a time. Someone shifted nervously in their chair. From the kitchen, the coffee machine clicked as it finished brewing. Every tiny sound suddenly seemed louder than usual. A few minutes later, the security guard walked back inside. Something about him had changed. His expression had gone pale. He approached me quietly. "They asked for your full name, your date of birth, and a verification phrase." I nodded, then calmly gave him the exact phrase. He repeated every word into the phone. After that, he simply listened. With every passing second, more color drained from his face. Finally, he lowered the phone and walked over to the executor. "They need to speak with whoever is handling the estate." The executor accepted the phone without saying a word. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When he finally ended the call, he slowly closed the folder my brother had spent weeks preparing. He looked around the room before speaking. "I've been instructed to suspend today's proceedings." My brother immediately stood up. "By who?" The executor met his eyes. "By an office within the Department of Defense." For the first time all morning, no one had an answer. My brother opened his mouth to argue, but before a single sentence could leave his lips, a deep mechanical roar echoed across the property. At first it sounded distant, then the vibration grew stronger. Within seconds, every window in my grandfather's old library began trembling. No one mistook it for traffic anymore. Every conversation stopped instantly. My brother hurried toward the window. His fiancée followed only a step behind. The rest of the family gathered silently. Hovering over the open field behind the house, a dark military helicopter slowly descended from the sky. Its powerful rotor wash bent the nearby trees and scattered gravel across the long driveway. The windows rattled violently. Several relatives instinctively stepped backward. Nobody spoke. The aircraft landed with calm precision. Before the blades had even stopped spinning, 2 uniformed service members stepped onto the grass. A moment later, a third officer emerged. He was older, calm, composed. The insignia on his uniform immediately made one thing obvious. This wasn't someone who had come by accident. Without wasting a second, he walked directly toward the house. The security guard opened the front door before the officer even reached it. When he entered the library, he didn't glance around the room. He looked directly at me, then stopped. "Sergeant First Class Ethan Walker." I gave a respectful nod. "Sir." Only then did he turn toward the executor. "I'm here representing the Department of Defense regarding questions raised about Sergeant First Class Ethan Walker's military service." The confidence my brother's fiancée had carried all morning disappeared instantly. Without saying a word, the officer accepted the folder from the executor. He flipped through several pages, closed it, then calmly placed it back onto the table. "This file is incomplete," he said evenly. "It reaches conclusions that those who prepared it had neither the authority nor the information to make." His eyes shifted toward the police officer. "I understand you were preparing to arrest one of our decorated veterans." Silence swallowed the room. No one reached for their coffee. No one whispered. No one even moved. The Pentagon officer never needed to raise his voice. His authority spoke loudly enough on its own. He removed a sealed envelope from the briefcase he carried. Several official documents were handed to the executor. A second, smaller packet was passed directly to my brother's fiancée. "Your department will receive formal verification within the hour," he explained. "Until that happens, I strongly advise that no further action be taken." She quickly scanned the first page. Before reaching the second, the color disappeared from her face. I had no idea these records were classified." "You couldn't have known," the officer replied calmly. "The problem wasn't asking questions." He paused. "The problem was deciding the answer before you had the authority to know it." Those words settled over the room like a weight. For the first time since the morning began, no one was looking at me. Every pair of eyes slowly turned toward my brother. He searched the room, almost desperately, hoping someone would defend him. No one did. The executor quietly reopened the will. "Based on the official verification now received," he announced, "there is neither legal nor factual justification to challenge Mr. Walker's inheritance." My brother finally found his voice. "So everyone just believes him now?" The executor calmly shook his head. "No." He closed the folder. "We believe the evidence." Those 4 words carried far more weight than the inheritance itself. Because confidence isn't proof. Volume isn't truth. And accusations never become facts simply because they're repeated loudly enough.